Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. In our newest episode of 10 Questions, we're back to ancient China, politics, philosophy, Qin, and the Han. So, like every other chapter we've done, we start with geography of ancient China. And as if you are watching our video, you can see it is a far way away from everybody else and has two big rivers. It has the Yellow River in the north and the Yangtze River in the south, and China will begin by developing between them. It's also at the eastern edge of Asia. It's far away from all of our other civilizations. We have Europe and the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates of Mesopotamia, the Indus and the Ganges that are going to form ancient India. And Alexander walks through all of them. So they are in some ways connected. It's not always the easiest way. It takes time to build those structures. But whether it's Alexander or St. Thomas, you could go from one of these civilizations to another. China's just too far away. It's just too big of a distance. And between them is the nomadic barbarians, especially the horse lords of the west and the north. So north of the Yellow River and far to the west and the northwest are all nomadic peoples. And there's no natural defense to keep them out. If they are looking for food, if they are looking for a place to steal food from or take food from, they're looking for a civilization to loot. Once they hit the rivers, once they hit the Yellow or the Yangtze River, it is a straight run right into the heart of Chinese civilization. So what is the cultural results of China's geography? Well, it's isolation from other civilizations, right? It's far away, and it's got this desert, not literal, but it's got the steppe, which is completely owned by the nomadic horse peoples. And so if you're going to connect to the other civilizations, you got to figure out a way of kind of getting through those nomadic horse peoples. And so the effect is that China has to be self-reliant, but it's isolated. So it's poor and technologically behind other civilizations because it doesn't have that diversity. It doesn't have that interaction. But at the same time, and this is kind of the irony, is it's also independently inventive. And so in some things, it's technologically and culturally ahead of other civilizations. So because it's developing in this isolation, things that help Chinese civilization be better, they can actually be advanced on, while on other things they're actually behind on. So we talked about Egypt in much the same way, right? So it's not a surprise. But unlike Egypt, China is constantly traumatized by nomadic invasions from the north and the west. Outsiders are dangerous. You can only rely on fellow Chinese. But that brings up an interesting question of who is Chinese? Who are the only people you can depend upon? But that brings us to a huge cultural result, that China should be unified. That unlike India, where geography is constantly pulling people apart, Chinese geography is bringing them together. Geography unifies China, at least at this early stage. And so there's this idea that China should always be unified. It's the only protection against the nomads that are outside of China, that are in the west and the north, and that the fellow Chinese, the people between these two rivers, are really only people you could trust. So what is the longitudinal view of Chinese imperial history? Well, it starts the same way India starts. One united state, one China. And then, as the Romance of the Three Kingdoms begins, the kind of first sentence in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms is that what is united divides, what is united breaks up. And so over enough long period of time, China breaks up into pieces. Those pieces then fight each other. And unlike India, where those pieces become smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, so that India will eventually divide up into thousands of little countries, those warring states in China are always fighting to create one China, to reunify China. The only question is, who will run it? It is not a question of should there be a China. The only question is who should run it. So in this way, it's the opposite of India. And this has a lot to do with the geography, how the geography is pulling them together. The mandate of heaven. So how does one run China? Okay, so you're going to unify China. You've decided to unify China. What's your legitimacy? How are you going to do it? And the answer is you've got to claim the mandate of heaven. So what is the mandate of heaven? Well, it's a form of legitimacy for Chinese rulers, for China's rulers, and it will be for the next several thousand years. The irony of the mandate of heaven is it wasn't created by people who actually ran China. It was created to justify the Shang dynasty's overthrow of the previous dynasty, of the Xia dynasty. Usurpers said, we are allowed to rebel because they have lost the mandate of heaven. The gods no longer support them. So it's a justification for rebellion. So what does it mean? So if you've got it, what does it mean? It means absolute power. You can do anything. Anything. You have the absolute power. You could level towns. You could move millions of people. You could build a dam and inundate an entire valley. You could do anything. Except, like the genie in Aladdin, there's limits. And that limit is on your absolute power, which should have no limits. The limit is you have to use that power to make people's lives better. So if you're going to build a dam and you're going to move 10,000 people from their villages, you can do it. But it's so that you could bring electricity to 10 million people down the river. You have to be able to use your absolute power. You have all the power in the world, but there's limits. And it has to be used to make people's lives better. Just like the genie in Aladdin has phenomenal cosmic powers in an itty-bitty living space. Now, your mandate, having it and losing it can be seen in nature. There's a concept in European history, or at least philosophy, that follows this as well, especially in the Middle Ages. The best example of this is in the King Arthur stories. But it's the idea that if you're a good king, the land is good, the land is rich. The land is healthy. So when King Arthur is at his best, the cows are being born and the chickens are happy and the grass is coming up and the wheat is good, right? But after Arthur goes into his depression when he learns that his best friend has been making whoopee with his wife, the land declines. Suddenly there's famine. Suddenly there's not enough rain. Suddenly the wheat harvest is bad. Suddenly when cows are born, they're born deformed. There's not enough chickens. That you can see it in nature. This curse of the bad king. Now that's a philosophical notion. It's a religious one as well. I'm sure if we went back, it's in the Old Testament in the different kings. I'm sure it applies to David, right? When David is good, things are good. When David is depressed, things are bad. I'm sure. I can't guarantee it, but I'm sure it has a biblical start too. But it's an old philosophical concept that if the king is good, the land is good. Politically, think of it the way of Katrina in 2005 and how the world looked at George W. Bush and the Republicans. Katrina was a Category 5 storm. It was an incredibly powerful storm that hit New Orleans and then inundated the city, flooded the city. How did George W. Bush react? He kind of didn't. He kind of went, all right, Louisiana, it's your call. You do your thing. And what happened is day after day after day, you had video, you had photographs of the suffering of people on their roofs, of drowned bodies on Time magazine's cover. It showed a weak reaction to natural disasters. And if you look at George W. Bush's polls, that's where his unpopularity begins. He never recovers from that point. It goes down, it goes down, it goes down. Then a year later, there's the immigration implosion, where he has the immigration reform bill that blows up in his face. And then a year after that, there's the economic implosion, the mortgage implosion. And when he leaves office in 2008, he is one of the least popular presidents to have ever held the office. And his party in 2008 got completely wiped out. The Republicans lost every major, not even major, they lost every election going on that there was a competitive race to. The Democrats swept everything because nobody could trust the Republicans to actually run the show anymore in 2008. But it was started by natural disasters, something that if the government can't handle, a bad government can't handle bad things happening. Any government can handle good things. Again, we saw it with COVID, right? We saw it with COVID. Good governments handle things in certain ways. Bad governments cannot handle them. They ignore them. They say they don't exist. They say don't worry about it. And so you could see losing the mandate of heaven in nature because the government is not making people's lives better. It's not doing its job, which is to protect people. So if you lose the mandate of heaven, you can be overthrown. You could be overthrown. Neither George W. Bush nor Donald Trump needed to lose the next elections. Donald Trump's reelection, George W. Bush's successor election. They could have, the famous picture that comes out of Katrina is George W. Bush flying over from Air Force One and looking down. That didn't have to be the photo. And to Donald Trump's credit, they understood that. The photo that George W. Bush could have had was, shirtless, waist deep in the muck, six-pack abs, right? A sleeping black baby in one arm, right? A Latino grandmother holding on to his back. And with his right arm, he's holding biceps flexing onto the helicopter ladder to be lifted out of the muck, off of this inundated city roof, bringing these two helpless people to safety. You put that on the cover of Time magazine, he could have run for a third term. People would have been like, well, maybe we should get rid of that constitutional limit on running a third term. I mean, his popularity would have been 9,000%, right? And to Donald Trump's credit, he understood that. So that's why they had the whole, when he got sick with COVID and nearly died from COVID, afterwards, They flew him on the helicopter back to the White House, and he stood there on the balcony of the White House, and he saluted the Marine 2 as it took off, and the video cameras were going so that he didn't look sick. He looked like he was in command. They wanted that image to be the image. That COVID does not have to destroy, does not ruin your masculinity. I don't really know what the idea was. It was to show that he's still commander-in-chief, obviously. But they understood that's the image they wanted. They understood the mistake that George W. Bush made. It didn't help because COVID kept going and kept going and kept going and still going, and we're still affected by it. But the idea is, if government can't handle problems, it's not a good government and you should overthrow it. So that brings us to Confucianism. What's its operating thesis? Well, Confucius is a teacher during a warring states period. He's a contemporary of Buddha. He's in the 500s to 479. So he's pre-Socrates, but he's a contemporary of Buddha. And he's a teacher during a warring states period. Well, that's a tough time to be a teacher because education during war always suffers. Schools are used by militaries because they're one of the few places that are big and made to hold lots of people. Hospitals are the other. The problem with using hospitals for military storage and the stuff is sick people are there and surgeons need to happen. So people who are wounded in war need to actually use the facilities of the hospital. Whereas a school, you could just move all the desks out. Boom, you have an empty room. So he hates war. So his philosophy is to stop people from fighting by reminding them of the ties that bind them together. And what is his operating thesis? It's your position equals your obligation plus your responsibilities. Your position equals your obligations plus your responsibilities. See, every role you have in life has a position. And that position brings with it the proper obligations and responsibilities to fulfill that role. You can be a son, but you're also a brother. You're also a husband. You're also a son-in-law. You're also a brother-in-law. You're also a father. You're also an uncle. You're also a worker. You're also a mentor. You're also a neighbor. You're also a consumer. You're also an employer. You're also a citizen. You're also a friend. And all of those things are different. You are all of those things. You are never just one thing. You are all of those things. You are simultaneously a son, which means your job is to take orders from your parents, is to do what you are told. But you are also a father, which means your job is to tell somebody what to do. Those jobs are, you are both of those things and they conflict. And one day in your life, if it hasn't happened already, you will be holding your child and you'll be like, okay, it's time to go to bed. And your parent will tell you, let him stay up a little longer. It's okay. And you'll be like, it's time for him to go to bed. I'm his father. And your father will say, well, I'm your father, and I'm telling you to let the baby stay up longer. It will happen to you. It happens to all of us. And so why is Confucianism then popular with governments? Well, because it's a conservative philosophy that is anti-war, but also anti-revolution. It emphasizes the proper connection between emperor and citizens. It also emphasizes the proper roles of citizens, what your job is supposed to do. You're a farmer. Farm. You're a merchant. Be a merchant. Sell stuff. Connect stuff. Do trade. Make stuff. The emperor is in charge and must help the people, yes. But the people must support and help the emperor. They have to pay the taxes, follow the laws, join the army. That's Mulan, right? China is being invaded by the Huns. So the emperor sends out a call. We need men in the army. Well, in Mulan's family, there aren't men to go into the army. So Mulan doesn't shirk the responsibility. She joins. She is a Confucian woman. She is not shirking responsibility. She is supporting the emperor in order to save China. Now, Confucianism is not as fun as Buddhism, so it's never going to be popular. It's about responsibilities. It's about your obligations. And that's not fun. Like, you're a student. You shouldn't be watching TikTok in class. Why? Because you're a student. And I'm the teacher. What does that mean? I have to be prepared. I have to have the lecture. I have to know the material. And I can't be watching TikTok. I would much rather be watching TikTok during class than talking about ancient China in class. And you'd much rather be watching TikTok in class than listening to me talk about ancient China in class. But our job, our responsibility, because of our role as professor, that's me, and student, that's you, means we can't do the fun thing. We have to do the right thing. So Buddhism is always going to be more popular with people, but it's popular with governments because it emphasizes this responsibility to each other. And so it becomes the political legitimacy of China, of Korea, of Japan, and in Vietnam. It's conservative, it's stable, and no matter who kind of runs, no matter who kind of takes over, invades and takes over China, or takes over or consolidates Japan, they're going to try to use Confucianism to kind of justify the hierarchy, the order of responsibility. All right, politics. Qin Dynasty. Qin Dynasty legitimacy. The Qin Dynasty, which will last from 221 to 206 BC, notice it's only 15 years. So the first question you have to ask is this really successful if it only lasts 15 years? Remember, a dynasty is a family, and 15 years is like one guy, right? Queen Elizabeth has the Windsor Mountbattens that at least go directly. I mean, there's claims it goes back to 1066, but the direct line of father to son as at least Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria to Edward, Edward to a George, to another George, to an Elizabeth. Right? This line, that's 200 years. She was in charge for 50-something years. Qin Dynasty? Yeah, 15 years. But, the Qin Dynasty is going to name China. China is the land of the Qin. So that tells you already what the first Chinese leader, what the first Qin leader is going to think of himself. And he's going to take a new title, and that title is emperor. Now, this does not mean general, like imperator in Rome does. It means king of kings. It means emperor. It means son of heaven. It means super king. This is not a tribal chief anymore. This is not a local king. This is, in all of the religious and political glory, the emperor. And this creates the idea of China as a political entity, and not just an amalgamation of different towns, of different villages, of something of warlords being like unified. It's a thing. China's now a thing. The second thing that Qin is all about is cultural isolation. See, here's the problem if you're the first emperor, and you've had this happen. If you've had a bad boyfriend, I actually like calling the Qin China's bad boyfriend, because they're really upset that you ever had a previous boyfriend. They don't like that you still have the stuffed animals or all the photos, or your Instagram has pictures of you two together, and they want you to get rid of it. Well, that's the Qin. The idea is that the Qin emperor is the best thing that ever happened. So the problem is people go, well, what about what happened? And you're like, no. I am the best thing that ever happened. Well, for me to be the best thing that ever happened, you have to get rid of the past. so that there is no record of anything being better. So Confucius and his ideas of obligations between the emperor and the people, burn it, destroy it. Chronicles of past great leaders, destroy them, get rid of them. You had no other boyfriends. You never had other boyfriends. You will never have other boyfriends. There's only me. That's the Qin's attitude to China. There's only me. And to show this off, you get monumental construction. Massive stuff being built. Now, we've seen this, right? And this has worked. The Roman emperors do it. The Egyptian pharaohs do it. They pay really well, you get really big stuff, and everyone's impressed. You today, 2,000 years later, want to go see the Roman Colosseum. You today, 4,000 years later, want to go see the Egyptian pyramids. Right? It's not the same for the Qin. And you should already know that. The Qin is all about me. It's all about the Qin, not about China at all. So when they build monumental construction, are they building it for other people? No. Are they building it to make people's lives better and to pay them really well and to make people like them? No. They're going to build massive stuff using slave labor. They're going to build 3,000 miles of the original Great Wall. Remember, there's still the enemy. There's the Nomads that are out there. So they're going to build the original Great Wall. That's if you're watching the video, that's kind of the stone wall. It just has to be big enough that horses don't go over it. That's not the modern Great Wall, which is a whole construction thing, which we'll get to in 102. But the idea is to protect the border. The Qin Emperor will also have a terracotta army built. 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots. It's an army for the afterlife. So that the emperor in the afterlife can go around conquering the afterlife. I mean, dude, come on. Everything about the Qin is, I am in charge. Look at what I can make you do. That's the slave labor building the Great Wall. I don't need your money. I don't need your taxes. What I need you to do is go up 1,000 miles to the north and live there in the winter and build a wall for me. And if you die, sucks to be you. Look at what I can make you do. So there's terrorism and there's violence and overwhelmingly a sense, a need, a desperation for control. It's legitimacy by violence and power. But there's no support. We've done this with the Assyrians. It's fear. But there's no support for it. So it's legitimacy. I can make you do it because I can make you do it. But you're not doing it out of love. You're not doing it because you want to. Which means if there's any change, the entire system's going to collapse. So what happens? Well, the system changes because no one lives forever. Yeah, your 8,000 terracotta soldiers and your 130 terracotta chariots don't stop you from dying. Your heart still stops. You're still mortal. And so when the first Qin emperor dies, there's a successor. Hi, I'm the new Qin. Hi, I'm just like that. I'm really tough. Really, 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 really tough. I'm Qin too. Yeah, I'm gonna, you build something for me really, really big. I'm gonna make you do it for free. Is anyone listening to that guy? Is anyone listening to the Emperor Billy? No. So the moment that the first emperor died, because people were afraid of him, the moment he died and his loser kinsman tried to step into his daddy's shoes, everybody said, F you. F off. You're not scary. We don't have to listen to you. And that's going to be the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty is going to reabsorb, because remember, you go through this process. So the moment the first Qin emperor dies, within a few years, China has broken apart into 18 or 25 little countries, all who call themselves China, or most of which call themselves China. the real China, and they all think the other ones to calling themselves China are fake China. And the Han Dynasty is going to reabsorb all those. Going to smush them back all together within like a year, like very quickly, which means China as a society, as a people, was willing to take anybody as their leader as long as it wasn't the Qin. And the Han are going to last 400 years. They are the longest lasting dynasty from 202 BCE to 220 AD. And if the Qin are the bad boyfriend, the Han are the boyfriend you marry. In fact, what happens is the Han become the largest ethnic Chinese group. See, when you think of Chinese people as an American, you're thinking of Han. You're thinking of Han Chinese. When you go and you order Chinese food and you go and you get your Szechuan chicken and you walk in, you are expecting to see a Han Chinese person. Cooking, taking your money, handing you your Szechuan chicken. But China is a continental state. It has lots of different peoples. It's very diverse. Whether it's the Turkish-speaking peoples out in the west, the Manchurian speaking people in the north, there are lots of different peoples. And so, but the largest identity group becomes Han. So this shows the Han Dynasty as a success. People like the Han. They want to be Han. In the ancient world, at least, before we get into issues of imperialism and conquest and such. Though we will get there. There's those issues. So, what if it's legitimacy? Well, its legitimacy is the anti-Qin. If you have a bad boyfriend, your next boyfriend, you're probably going to want him to act completely different. The opposite. And that is the Han. If the Qin are all about me, the Han are going to be about us. And is there a philosophy out there that emphasizes us? Yes, Confucianism. Confucianism emphasizes the connection of the people between the dynasty and the people to the dynasty instead of selfishness. Instead of look at what I can make you do, which is the Qin, it is the Han's, what can I do for you and how can you help me achieve it? The legitimacy is making people's lives better. The first emperor of the Han, Liu Bang, was himself a peasant family. So his incentive was to make peasant lives better. Confucianism does that. Or can. It doesn't always do that, but it does that by connecting the emperor through obligations to the peasantry. So how does the Han make people's lives better? Well, that's the wars of the Han and the building of the Silk Road. So to make people's lives better in ancient China is to protect them from nomads. Remember, nomads are on horses and are scary, and they need food every once in a while, and they're going to hit those rivers, and they're going to come right into your civilization, burning everything along the way. Just look at Mulan, the movie Mulan. And if you don't want that, well, there's the Mongols who come in and obliterate 30% of urban China. So what are the Han going to do? They're going to fight in the West to push the nomads away. Physical security. A series of wars that are expensive wars, but what they do is push north and west to push the borders. Instead of building a wall and saying, you can't come in here, but also saying, we will go no further, what they do is they build armies. And those armies go into the nomad territories and push them back. The effect is to also make China bigger. But a lot of that area is not the greatest for farming. It's farther away from the big rivers, right? It's frontier land. So kind of like the Assyria was for the Sumerians. It's far away, but it's a place you could start over. It's a place you could settle. It's a place for relatively cheap, if not free land. And so it allows Chinese civilization to expand from between those two rivers north and to the west. Also, the Han are going to pacify the southern territories south of the Yangtze River, the various different peoples who were there, and turn it into China's breadbasket, creating food security. This is going to be a bit of imperialism. This is going to be colonization. So Han peoples are going to move south into kind of the belly part of China, if you look on it on the map. And that becomes the richest food parts, the real farming land of China. So we got physical security. We've got food security. What we don't yet have is economic security. And that's where the Silk Road comes in. The Silk Road is the connection to the civilizations in the West. India, the Middle East, eventually Europe. And that creates economic security by creating these trade links. See, the problem with China economically was it was more or less a circular economy. There's a little bit of trade to say, the peoples of Korea, a little bit of overseas trade to Japan, maybe some trade over the mountains into the peoples of Vietnam, but there's not much. It's mostly Chinese people trading stuff to other Chinese people. And so the economy kind of grows slowly because it's the same money, just in different people's pockets. What the Silk Road does is allow money to flow into China. Economic security by creating trade links. And basically it's luxury goods, silk especially, but also spices, in exchange for money and knowledge, money and information. Buddhism comes east. Buddhism is probably the most important knowledge-based item to come east into China and into the east. But this situation will continue. China will essentially be the leading economic state in the world, the biggest manufacturing state. It will sell spices, it will sell tea, it will sell manufactured goods. Later on, it will be porcelain. It will sell all kinds of stuff. And what it takes in is gold and silver. It takes in money in exchange for all of these goods. So it's the manufacturing hub of the world, which is kind of like, as a foreign policy person, which I am, I have read about the rise of China and how dangerous China is getting rich, and China's dominating economics for 20 years, right? And it's China, 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 and China's dominating the economics. China's growing at 10%. This is scary. But historically, if you're going to ask Chinese foreign policy people, they're going to say, that's just who we are. We're returning, like the last 150 years is the anomaly where China is poor. For 4,000 years, China's rich. Or at least 2,500 years since the building of the Silk Road, China is rich. China is the leading manufacturing country in the world. It has a large population. Its population is easily equal to Europe, all of Europe, through most of history, if it's not bigger. And so China becomes a leading civilization in the world, where before it was isolated, traumatized, attacked, behind. With the Han, it gains physical security, food security, and economic wealth. So then how does this end? What? If the Han are doing so great, how does this end? And the answer is, you get a series of child emperors. A child emperor happens because you have a young emperor, has a child, and then the emperor dies. So they rule for 5 years. They rule for 6 years. They don't rule very long. And you end up with a series of child emperors, which means you get infighting between various groups in the government over who's going to get to run the show. And at the end of the Han, there were the eunuchs, government officials. The eunuchs are castrated men. And the reason why, as an emperor, you'd like them is, one, They're loyal to you. They're not loyal to their own families because they don't have any families. They don't have any kids that they could promote. They don't have any wives with their own families they need to get jobs for. A eunuch who can't have any children, who's had his been castrated, he's had his cojones removed, can only be loyal to the emperor. That's the idea of them. That's why you like them. But you also have the empress's family. So if there's no emperor, there's still an empress, and they're the mom of the future emperor, right? The child emperor. The child emperor is just too young to be emperor. It's a 6-year-old boy, right? Well, his mom is like, well, I'm going to run the show, and I have brothers who will help me. So you get the empress's family, and then you get the Confucian scholars, who are the smart people at the local level trying to run the show. You know, the eunuch government officials are in the capital, you know, doing the day-to-day work for the emperor. But out in the countryside, out in a local village, the guy who's putting stamps onto birth certificates, that's a Confucian scholar. And they may have a completely different idea of what's going on, especially if the eunuch groups and the emperor's families are fighting each other, and the Confucians are like, no, we just want to keep things straight and narrow. Like, look at what's happening at the local area, right? So there's all this infighting that's happening. That's not civil war yet, but it means a lot of government's not getting done. So that's fine as long as nothing bad happens. Well, what happens is a series of plagues happen. In fact, the Antonine plague happens, a plague that's could come around and probably wipe out, following the Silk Road, wipe out something like 20% of the Middle East and Europe. You know, it's a predecessor to Justinian's plague and a predecessor to the Great Plague of the 1400s, the bubonic plague. The Antonine plague, there's an argument that the Antonine plague is one reason for the 3rd century crisis that erupts in Rome and will eventually break Rome up into pieces. What these series of plagues and natural disasters do, combined with the child emperors who obviously can't do anything, and the infighting of the various different governmental organizations, is a loss of the mandate of heaven. Nothing is getting done, and so what happens is the Yellow Turban Peasant Rebellion begins. It's a Taoist group that kind of wants to destroy government. It's a little anarchic, and it wants to destroy government to impose their own government in which will bring heaven onto earth. Well, to destroy the Yellow Turban, you get the rise of regional general kings. Again, lacking an adult emperor means the adult emperor cannot lead the armies, so a child emperor can't lead the army, so you need generals at the local level with private armies. They rise up to defeat the Yellow Turban, and what they do is they turn on each other. The first goal is to control the emperor, because if they can control the emperor, like they can marry the emperor to their daughter, they get to be the leading man of China. So it's a way of being emperor without technically being emperor. And so the first civil wars are like to control the emperor. And so one of these general kings says, I'm going to be I'm going to be the caretaker of the emperor. Well, somebody who hates him says, no way, I'm not going to let you have that much power. And so they fight. They replace the eunuchs. They defeat the empress's families, because of course the empress's family is like, whoa, we're in charge of, you know, running the emperor. And as this descends into more and more conflict, eventually the civil war is just to replace the Han completely with a whole new family. And what happens is this becomes the Three Kingdoms period. China breaks up into about 25 different states, which then consolidate into 3 big states that just fight each other for the next several hundred years. It is a long period of disunity. It is a trauma, because it is a period of war, death, banditry, crime, plagues, of weakness. The story of this period is told in one of the great novels of the world, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is the oldest extant novel version of it is from 1522. And what it does is it combines Buddhist with Confucian values. It really does take by this idea that both of these values, the Buddhist and the Confucian, are both important. And it becomes this origin tale of kind of a modern China, of a post-ancient China. And it combines morality and choice, right? Very Buddhist, with the cyclical nature of heaven, very Confucian, right? Very Buddhist as well. The idea that, as I said, as I quoted, right, what was united must over time fall apart, must disunite, right? That there are the kingdoms, the empire, the emperors, they're all both supposed to do what they need to do. They can make choices. They have to make moral choices, but they're also stuck in the cycles of heaven. They're also stuck in being alive at a time when things are going wrong. Right? It's Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a purpose. To everything there's a time, right? Turn, turn, turn. Right? Well, there's a time to grow and a time to die. Well, if you're in the time of things growing, that's great. But if you're in the time of things dying, that's bad. But how do you then deal with that? Well, how you deal with that is then you Buddhist, right? How you minimize suffering. So it combines these different values in telling the story of thousands of characters in what happened. It's not a history. It's fictional. It's a historical fiction, but of these major characters, of these historical characters striving against their situations. So that is ancient China. So thank you very much. That is the end of part 2. The next lecture will be on Africa, East and West Africa, and that will start part 3. So thank you very much. Be safe. Take care.